Hi everybody, it's Emily. Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my research project and what I want to do. First off, I want to apologize for not having a PowerPoint presentation. The problem is I'm kind of technology stupid and I don't know how to use a PowerPoint while having a video going. So you're just gonna have to deal with me, I guess. I apologize for that. Okay, so I wanted to start off by talking about my reasoning behind why I wanted to talk about William Byrd and Thomas Tallis. William Byrd and Thomas Tallis have always been really interesting to me. I've always loved English music, especially from the Renaissance, and I feel like English music is a bit underrated. Thomas Tallis and William Byrd are both really highly regarded Renaissance composers. And so I thought that I would try to shed more light on their lives and on their composition styles, especially because here in the States we're just not as interested in Byrd and Tallis as we are Britain, or we are our own composers here in the States. And the problem with focusing just on American composers and just continental composers in Europe is that we're missing on this really rich, diverse, if slightly dated style that the English had. The English were always a little bit behind because they were on an island, and so they were kind of doing their own thing, and they would get styles after they'd been around for a while on the continent. And so the English just kind of developed their own style, and I feel like a lot of times people don't appreciate that as much as they should. As we can tell, this is not like your traditional experimental research project. It's a lot more to do with just going and finding sources and doing a lot of reading, lots and lots and lots of reading. But to further my research, because Lord knows that 5 articles isn't enough to encompass the lives and the styles of these two composers, I'm wanting to go to find more sources that on both Tallis and Byrd, and that includes finding more articles on EBSCOhost and ProQuest and all those fun databases that we have available to us here, going on to CPDL and IMSLP and being able to look through their research that they have, and not only that, but to take pieces by them that are available on CPDL and IMSLP, and being able to look through them and analyze them myself and notice style similarities and stylistic differences, both between them and amongst their own works. For example, we were talking about, oh gosh, what was it? The one sonnet piece of Byrd's that was really uncommon, but it was written the way it was because it was written for Queen Mary. So you've got all that, and I think that's just really interesting, and it would be interesting to do my own analyses, and even on the pieces that I've already looked through my research already, it would be interesting to see if I actually agree with what they were saying when it comes to fugue and when it comes to specific stylistic passages within certain pieces. My capstone project is not going to be experimental. My capstone project is going to be having a choral recital. And the reason I decided to do William Byrd and Thomas Tallis is because I'm really interested in doing an English set of music, because like I said, it's really underappreciated, and I've always loved it, and so I just want to bring it more to the forefront of people's minds. And I hope that if people come to my recital and they hear all this wonderful English music, they'll be like, oh, maybe I should listen to some of this on my own. Maybe I should program this for some of my choirs, because a lot of this English music is really accessible middle school on. Some of it's a bit harder. Like I wouldn't recommend doing a really tough Britain piece. But Thomas Tallis and William Byrd, a lot of their music is really accessible from about middle school on. And so my goal in doing this recital is to not only obviously do my recital and, you know, get my grade and graduate and whatever, but it's also to kind of open people's minds to new possibilities. I always pick kind of obscure music. One of my issues with my undergrad recital was that my pianist said, "Emily, you just pick really obscure stuff," and she's a wonderful pianist, but she hadn't heard of a lot of these pieces, just because they're not as well done or not as often done, and a lot of it is just because they're just not as prominent composers or whatever. I just always choose really obscure music. But I did William Byrd and Thomas Tallis specifically in this because I know I'm going to have to write program notes, and Thomas Tallis and William Byrd are going to be the hardest to find information for, just because they're so obscure, and not really obscure, but because they're so little known about them. And so I figured I'd start with them, so I was able to get through the easier ones, the harder ones first. I'm also planning on doing some Britten. I'm probably going to do some Rutter, because I love Rutter, but just English composers. And I'm sure I'll have probably an Italian set and maybe a French set, probably a German set. But mainly I want to focus on English music because that's what I love. But I think that what the research that I've done so far is going to impact what I'm programming even more than I thought it would, because I was already like, oh yeah, I need to program Byrd and I need to program Tallis. But the research that I've done has just really opened me up to the possibilities of doing just a full-on English Renaissance set. Because a lot of this music is so unexplored, and a lot of it is so gorgeous, and it's just got so much rich history behind it. I only talked about it a little bit because this actually had more to do with my my choral materials class than it did with my research class, and I learned most of this information in there. But a lot, especially during Byrd's and Tallis's time, Henry VIII, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth were all right in the middle of that, and so they were coming in at the end of Henry's reign and going through Elizabeth's. I think Byrd even made it all the way to James. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure he made it all the way to James. But the thing is, because they were in the middle of all this political upheaval, really, because Henry was Protestant, Mary was Catholic, and then Elizabeth was Protestant again, and Byrd was Catholic, and I'm pretty sure Tallis was Catholic too. You had them kind of struggling with their own inner feelings of morality and Christianity, and then having to deal with the fact that at one point it was basically illegal to be Catholic in the UK or in Britain. And so you get to see, especially through Tallis's life, just he'll switch back and forth, and there's this, and I'll be definitely doing more research on this, but you can kind of guess what time period he writes each of these pieces in based on the language that they're in and the style that they're in, because whenever he's doing Protestant music, it's very simple. It's always in English. It's pretty much, it's a lot of homophonic or homorhythmic texture. But whenever you get into his Catholic music, of course it's in Latin, because Latin was the language of Catholicism, I think, until the 1950s. But you had Latin music, or Latin language, and you had really dense polyphonic textures that created just more of a carpeted texture than specific words. And I think part of the reason that he did that, I'm totally going off on a tangent, but I think part of the reason he did that was because Latin wasn't really understood And as much as it was an important text, you know, there was still the issue of it not being understood, and so he was able to play with it more and just make it more beautiful and more about the music than he was with the English text, because part of the reason they were doing it in English was to make it understandable. And if you have English music, but you have it in this really dense polyphonic texture, you're not going to be able to understand it. So he had it way more simple and way more homorhythmic. Like I said, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but I just find that extremely interesting. But yeah, furthering the research, I want to be able, not only do I want to be able to find more articles and do my own research when it comes to an analysis of pieces, one day, and I know this is going to be really further in the future because I am a broke college student, but one day I really want to be able to go to England and try to find primary sources on both Byrd and Tallis, because I think it's essential, as someone who's really into history as I am, I think it's essential to be able to go in and find actual first-person accounts of these people, and I know there aren't a lot, especially on Tallis, because we don't even know when he was born. But finding more and more first-person sources and historical sources where people are actually interacting with Byrd and Tallis, I think that's going to be extremely useful, because that's going to give me even more exact information, and more just more accurate information, because they're not looking through the lens of of hundreds of years. They're literally right there seeing what's going on and writing it down in diary form or letter form or what have you. But it's just really, really interesting to me. I quite enjoy thinking about how another thing that I think is really important is I think it's important to know how Byrd and Tallis affect Britten and Rutter and other English composers of today in the 20th and 21st centuries, because of course you can see in general how style changes throughout time, but I'm really interested to see how Byrd specifically affected Rutter, or Tallis specifically affected Britten, if at all. As far as I know, I've not done any research into this so far, but as far as I know, Rutter totally hated Britten, or Rutter might have totally hated Byrd, or anything like that. So it will be interesting to see how Byrd's style might have affected Rutter, or Byrd and Tallis' style might have affected Rutter and Tallis, or Rutter and Britten. I've gotten all the names confused at this point. Let's see, what else? But yeah, just being able to tell how the past affects the future. And like I said, I'm really, really into history. So to me, it's not just about like how they affected them musically, but how they affected them personally. And how, like I said earlier, how historical context affected their lives and affected their music, because again, I think that's super, super important. Like I said, I'm a choral conducting major, or I don't know if you call it major at this point. I'm working on a choral conducting master's, and so I'm not really focusing so much on the experimental. But I think it's extremely, I think that historical research is also extremely important, because if you don't know what happened in the past, how can you know how it's affecting what's going on today? And again, as cheesy as it sounds, you know, history that's not studied is doomed to repeat itself, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in terms of music, but very much so in terms of other things. But as a choral conductor and as someone who wants to go out and teach students, it's important for me to be able to understand these composers, why they wrote, what they wrote, how they wrote, the styles in which they wrote, the staves and the notation system that they used, and being able to go back and actually look at the original neumes and all that fun stuff, because I want to be able to know, like, is this edition actually like useful? Is this actually accurate? But it's important for me to be able to express to my students, this is what happened to this composer, and this is why he writes the way he did. This is why this piece about Queen Mary is so luscious and so is through composed, as opposed to Byrd's other sonnet pieces, because Byrd, or was it Byrd? I think it was Byrd. I'm so confused at this point. Yeah, it was Byrd. It was Byrd. But Byrd wrote this piece for Mary, even though she was 50 years dead already, because he was so, so respectful of her. And I want to be able to express that kind of feeling to my students instead of just, here's a piece of music, read it, and let's go on. Because especially as singers, where we deal with text, knowing the context is so important, because it helps it helps us express the emotions that are needed to turn a piece from notes and rhythms to something musical and something wonderful. I'm not saying that instrumentalists don't make things beautiful and wonderful. I'm just saying that we require words to do it, and we require the emotions behind those words to do it. And I think, treading on thin ice here, but I think kind of in a different way than instrumentalists do. But I think if anyone has like a certain interest in a composer of any time period, I think it's important to research them. And so because I really, really, really love Byrd and Tallis, that's who I focused on. I absolutely love listening to English Renaissance music, and doing this research has made me listen to it even more so. There are a couple, not just Byrd and Tallis pieces, but again, these came mainly from my choral materials class. But If Ye Love Me by Tallis, When David Heard by Orlando Gibbons, what's the other one? I can't remember. Anyway, look up some of these pieces, and I hope that through my experiences of going through these and writing these literary analyses, I guess, and sharing them with you and doing these videos, I hope that I've maybe sparked an interest in you of getting out there and exploring some sort of music that you've never heard before, whether it's English Renaissance music or it's 14th century Hungarian, whatever. Just go out and explore something new. And I think that's part of what I've really enjoyed about this class, is being able to really go in depth with two of my favorite composers and learn things about them that I didn't know before. So thanks guys, thanks for watching my video, and have a great Christmas.